Hello. I don't know if anybody can actually see me or hear me, but here I am. It says 0 viewers, so I might wait a minute, see if people are trying to get on. I'll check my email to see if anybody is trying to email me. Hold on 1 second. Maybe I'll turn like this. So it's a little more light. Just gonna check my email to see if anybody's having problems getting on. Slow computer. Don't see anybody yet. Let me just log into my. Okay. Oh, we got some people viewing. That looks good. Looks like some people are joining us. I'm gonna wait a few more minutes to see if anybody else joins. Having problems connecting to my Harvard email. So if you guys want to email me anything, I would email it to darrengraves@gmail.com because Harvard email is just not working for me right now. For folks who are here, if you go to the if you go to the Moodle in the PowerPoint slides folder, there's a thing called Qualitative Interviewing Primer, and that'll be those are some slides I'm going to sort of be working off of, in case you want to look at that while we're going along. And then there should be a place on the side to do question and answers if you're doing this through, if you're looking at us through Google Hangouts. I know it might also be broadcasting through YouTube, and I'm not sure if that has the same capability, but you can definitely ask questions. That feature should be available to you. And if you're having any problems communicating with me at all, like I said, if you email me at darrengraves@gmail.com, that'll be the fastest way to get at me. Just got my phone here out just to make sure I don't miss anybody's messages. And I think since it's, I'll wait one more minute till 3:05, and then I'm just gonna get going, because we all supposedly have some kind of a life right now. But let's let people. Just one more minute. All right, I think we're just gonna get started. So if you didn't hear before, we have this PowerPoint in the iSight. It's called Qualitative Interviewing Primer, and I'm sort of going to be working off that to give this little mini talk. But and the first slide really is just talking about the difference between qualitative and quantitative research. Quantitative research, which we typically associate, more with numbers. But it's not. It's more just about what types of questions they're trying to answer. And quantitative, research is really about looking at whether there is or is not a relationship between variables, or what is the relationship between variables. Um, Whereas qualitative research is more interested in sort of looking at process and how, and to the extent that there is a relationship or not, what does that actually look like? Um, and so just to put that out, that's a bigger sort of epistemological question. But, I think the power of doing we'll talk about interviews, but the power of doing, qualitative interviews is to really, we're not, and we'll come back to this, I guess, this notion of, we're not really trying to talk about replicability or generalizability when we're talking about qualitative research. So what does that mean for you in terms of your research? It means that, some of you might be thinking about trying to get as many people as you can to interview, with the sense that if I can get, enough interviews, I'll have enough data for it to mean something. And I think that makes sense, but in some ways in qualitative research, and the same thing with quantitative as well, I don't want to go down this path too far, but with qualitative research, a sample of one is powerful, and in some ways what you're trying to do with qualitative research is to really understand that sample of one and really help us understand what that sample of one, that person, for example, is really, how they're making sense of things. So we're not in the business here of trying to like scoop up as many participants in our samples so that then we'll be able to say something scientific. I mean, that's just a different type of epistemology. That's when you're trying to like prove some kind of statistical relationship between this, that, and maybe something else, as opposed to maybe what you're more likely trying to do in this paper and in this class, which is like, to really get a sense of how maybe, somebody that, some students are really making sense of a particular aspect of their life, their identity, whatever it is. And that's more geared towards qualitative, and you'd really sort of frame the research from the perspective of you trying to understand this larger concept that we've all been working on, and that are sort of embedded in your questions for your papers. But you're just trying to but you may just try to understand that through the perspective of one particular person, or a few particular people that you're interested in, that you're interested in hearing that perspective, and not to make the claim that, now that I've heard it from this particular person or particular people, then now I can generalize to the larger group, because that's not what we're trying to do here. But it helps us understand a way of it gives us a way of conceptualizing how to understand these issues, knowing that they might manifest themselves differently with different folks for a lot of good reasons. So that's all I'm really trying to convey in that first slide. The second slide is important, this notion of researcher as instrument, right? In quantitative research, often what we're trying to do is eliminate ourselves from the research, right? So to the extent that we're trying to make it so that we have no impact on the research. So we make ourselves distant, we create surveys, we don't, we make it really we sort of structure the administration and of the interviews in a way that we're not part of it. But in qualitative research, that's impossible, because we are the instrument. So to the extent that you're going to be interviewing people, the data that you get is completely a manifestation of who you are in relationship to the people that you're interviewing. So you could imagine, for example, that if, the difference between, you interviewing a complete stranger about whatever topic, and then you interviewing somebody that you know very well about a particular topic, you'd get really different types of data, for better or for worse, and that's fine. Um, and then in the context of this class, sometimes when we talk about research, and we think about the racial identities of the folks, who are the interviewers or the interviewees. I mean, that's something to think about too. The notion of, maybe I know I'm currently involved in a research project where sometimes, we try and figure out it, if there's a difference, whether there's a difference, whether we should be strategic about, um, the race of the interviewee relative to the race of the interviewer. And that's fair. I think that's reasonable. And I think that all that to say is that in qualitative research, we don't try to explain that stuff away. Rather, we actually we're quite intentional about explaining and thinking about our relationship to our interviewees. And we kind of, and that's part of the story. It's almost part of the story of the research, right? And so, to the extent that you feel like, whether you feel like it's a complementary type of identity match, or one that's, maybe not so complementary or whatever, so for example, if you are a white person who's, interviewing folks of color about, whatever topic, it would be important to maybe foreground, your identity relative to theirs. Not to say that the data you get is inauthentic or it's not the truth, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But it's more just to help us understand the story that unfolds from, the interaction between you and your interviewees. So, all that to say is that we don't try to eliminate ourselves as, from the equation in terms of influencing it, because we just know that in qualitative research, we see ourselves as participants in the research, right? We don't see ourselves as separate from it. So once you're participating in it, you've already influenced it. In that regard, we really try and foreground, both in terms of our analysis and sometimes in terms of the writing of it, how our identities played out and how that might have impacted the type of data that we got. Okay. For those of you who are on Google Hangouts, there should be a little panel that says Q&A, and you should be able to submit questions on the side so that I can answer them for you, and so I don't have to just be talking at you the whole time. And again, if for some reason you feel like I'm not hearing you, or you're not communicating with me, you can also email me at darrengraves@gmail.com. So that'll just be a fast way to do it. So let me just keep going because I don't see any questions. The next slide, which talks about the researcher as instrument. Yeah, I talked about the stuff. We are the tool. In quantitative, the survey is the tool. We're the tool. It really matters who we are. So we can't eliminate ourselves. In terms of the purpose of interviews, we're really just trying to understand, what's going, how other people are making sense of something in particular. And so we gotta, so I think this slide that says the purpose of interviews is really about trying to get people to articulate something that's of interest to you, and really take in this notion that where it says, there must be a sense that others' individual stories are of worth. One, I mean, when you're interviewing somebody, they're putting themselves in a vulnerable position, right? Because they have to share things with you. They don't have to, but you're hopefully just asking them to share things with you. You have some power because you're going to be in the ultimate position of representing that person in terms of the data, the way you decide to present the data. And so I think from a researcher perspective, you want to honor the level of vulnerability that they are putting themselves through. And so in that sense, you really want to go out of your way to not use them, or exploit them, and really make sure that that you're honoring that relationship. So not just walking all over them, trying to see, like, we'll talk about looking, how to listen, but gauging emotions, always giving the opportunity for them to opt out of this whole thing. And I see we have a question from Elena. And Elena asks, can I talk a minute about autoethnography in the qualitative space, please? Yeah. Which I think is a good question in terms of when we were talking about identity. So, in critical race theory and in a lot of other sort of qualitative realms, there is this notion of autoethnography, this notion that you can actually kind of almost interview yourself. We actually Kim and Adrian and I have an article coming out that's basically an autoethnography. As soon as it's ready, we'll send you the link. But it's a model where you basically, you're not like literally sitting there interviewing yourself, mechanically asking yourself questions, but you have a set of questions that you might ask yourself, that you might write down, that you sort of, the way we did it, when we had questions and we would write down, we sort of write down like a journal or sort of a page or two or three, depending on what the question was about. Our research was about actually teaching this class. But so we asked a bunch of questions of ourselves around just different aspects of the class, times where we face challenges, things like that. And then we would answer them. But then what we do is to, and it's, for some folks, it might seem like, wow, that's really weird. It's just a way you can just tell your own story without necessarily any rigor, right? But what you usually have to do then is to take a, theoretical lens, in this case, something like critical race theory, to sort of to sort of analyze or to foreground or to illuminate things that we wouldn't see otherwise through the data. So it's not just, so there was parts of the data that made it into the, part of our interviews that made, our self interviews that made it into the article, some that didn't. But we were really just trying to look at each other's data and look at our own data through the lens of some specific tenets, and then which helped us sort of craft, a narrative around a specific research question that we were trying to answer. So so how would that look in your, in your assignments? It would look like maybe you analyzing your own experiences as a teacher, as a student in a particular space, in a particular role, in a particular identity. You would almost want to treat it like if you were trying to act, like if you weren't going to interview yourself, if you were sort of thinking about interviewing someone else instead of you, like, what would you ask? What are the key questions, or what would, or core things that you want them to be talking about and focusing on? Figure out what those questions are, and then kind of answer them. And probably like write yourself some answers down. And then what you'll end up doing is using once you sort of write, and if you want to, even if you really wanted to, if you didn't want to write it down, you could actually just, because the technology is so cool, you could just record, audio record yourself and just listen to yourself, just sort of, talk it out instead of writing it out, and maybe end up like transcribing the parts that you end up needing to transcribe. But all that to say is, after you kind of either read what, kind of reread what you write or re-listen to what you said, it'll start to dawn on you in some ways, and it might have dawned on you already in terms of some of the questions that you already asked, how specific tenets of CRT or core, or some principles that we've learned, or some core concepts sort of are speaking to some of the things that you talked about in your questions to yourself, and then sort of use those tenets, those principles, etc., concepts to sort of organize how you both analyze and present the data to us ultimately. And so I hope that was helpful, and please send me another question or follow up if I wasn't. And again, I'm not seeing any questions pop up over here in my little Q&A bar, but there's supposed to be a Q&A bar on the Google Hangout site. I don't know what's going on in the. I think this is broadcasting on YouTube, and I have no idea what's happening there. But you should be able to ask questions, and if you're not, if it doesn't seem like it's working, you can email me like Elena just did at darrengraves@gmail.com. Okay. So one of the things so you'll come up with a list of questions, and when you're actually talking to people, there's a few ways to actually do it. You can sit there and I like to just, especially now that it's so easy with, cell phones and iPads and things, or even your computer. I like to audio, you want to let people know you're doing it, of course, but audio record the interview. Just so that you can just you don't have to make any mistakes in terms of what people said. It usually makes for really rich data when you can, transcribe word for word, and what the person said. It kind of just brings more authentically than some sort of summary or abridged version of what somebody said. So I usually like to audio tape them. If for some reason that's not possible, then you're a really good typer. I guess you can try and type as while they're writing. I mean, while they're talking. But I usually like to audio tape. But you want to let people know. And of course, just before I keep going, you just want to let people know this is for a class. This is not going to be shared with anybody. Only your teacher's going to see it. Blah 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 blah. So that you can put people at ease in terms of being involved in the research, getting audio tapes, things like that. I keep saying audio tapes, and that just shows how old I am because I'm not really taping things anymore. But so you definitely I think it's more ideal to get the the audio recording of the interview, and so you'll be asking questions, and then you could be recording, right? And in some ways they might feel like, okay, then I can kind of relax while these questions are getting answered, because I have this thing recording it for me. But in a lot of ways, doing an interview requires a lot of active listening, and it requires listening on a few different levels. And one of those levels is just like, what are they saying? Like, you'll ask a question, right? And you want to figure out, like, are they asking, are they giving me the information I'm looking for, right? And so that's sort of the most obvious level of listening, right? Because sometimes you ask questions, and maybe because of the wording of the question, or maybe because they just don't get it, you know what I mean? People start not giving you the information you're looking for. So you want to make sure, and that seems pretty obvious, right? But there's probably at least two more levels of listening. So one of them is sort of listening to, like, in the inner voice, right? Language or something that sort of indicates to you that something are there to understand. Sometimes I like to call it, the pregnant pause, right? Sometimes I might pause that sort of indicates, like, again, not without turning this into some sort of an interrogation, obviously, right? And this is why I'm saying, like, honor this relationship, right? This is not like, now that you've decided to be in this interview, like, I can ask you anything and anything I want. It's more like, in a way that's respectful, and not turning an interrogation. But if you feel, you have to be listening for places where maybe you need to get some more clarifying information, because sometimes people tell you stuff and you don't want to assume that you understand, or maybe you just don't understand, or maybe more importantly, you want to get them to articulate something that you might think you understand, but if you think about, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you have at least seen qualitative research, and what's so powerful about it is when you get these, like, long stretches of, like, quotations from the interview that sort of bring it to life. Like, you see in this, like, literal language, you can almost hear the person talking, and you can it just brings it to life. And you want to be able to have them have them be able to have those great things, talking specifically about what you're interested in, right? And so sometimes they might be like, if you're, I'm just making one up, you might be doing some kind of, like, project on satisfaction in the classroom or something, like, but, and they'll say things like, yeah, I'm satisfied, I'm happy in the classroom. And that's nice, but then you want to get them to say, like, well, why? And, like, what else is going on? Or are you totally happy? And you might, in the way they said it, they might indicate that they weren't totally happy, or they were sort of ambivalent about it. You want to sort of get some more. You want to kind of dig deeper a little bit and get them to articulate something that you don't have to just like explain to people and make people take a huge leap of faith because they just said they were happy, and then you're going to infer all these reasons why, as opposed to getting them to enumerate and say why. So that's a level of listening that's not just are you getting the right answers, but a level of listening that requires you to be like nimble and see if there's places where you need to be asking more. Okay, and we'll come back to that. And then the third level of listening, which is on the slide list titled "How to Listen Continued." The first bullet is sort of like a body. It's like the nonverbal. It's like the body language. You know, again, you don't want to. You're not trying to exploit people. You know, I don't think you guys are going to be asking it. You know, I don't know. I mean, I don't think you'll be asking any questions that are going to be traumatic to people. But you know, you need to be. This is a human being, right? And again, even if you're just doing this from the selfish perspective of like getting good data, if your interviewee is uncomfortable, they will not give you good data. They will not share things with you. They will not trust you, right? Or they'll just be in a bad place where they're just like don't want to talk anymore and shut down. And when people, and again, I'm going to state this clearly again, if they want to shut it down, shut it down. There's no reason to be like compelling people or, to do this interview. But all that to say is you want to check, does this person look tired in general? Or are they tired of this type of line of questioning? Or are they getting uncomfortable, to the point where this is, not good? So so it's sort of like this sort of bigger picture level of listening that's really about like, is this person okay? Like, are they comfortable going down the line of, questioning? So all that to say is that, which is in that last bullet point, is that, doing an interview is tiring as the interviewer, because like you're sitting there like trying to get questions answered. You're doing all this stuff. Like, are they answering my question? And is there a place where I need to be asking a little bit, following up? Are they okay? And this is all happening throughout the entire course of the interview. So it's quite an active process. I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions. I'm seeing nothing. Again, if you have questions and you don't think I'm like answering, you don't see me answering them on like the YouTube, if you're on the YouTube or on the Google site, just email me at darrengraves@gmail.com. Elena's already done that for us. So there's that. Now I'm going on to the page. It's called the side. It's called following up. So I think we're, for the types of interviews that we were doing, you guys will likely be doing for this project, it's called like a semi-structured interview. In other words, you might have a specific set of questions that you want to ask folks or a person, but you should give yourself the flexibility to follow up or ask clarifying questions that don't necessarily appear on your, like your original set of questions that you were going to ask. You know what I mean? So sometimes some of us have been trained, especially those of us in psychology, for example, or different parts of education, where like there's this like interview and you can't like deviate from it. It's like you must read it exactly as it, it's written, and and there's no like deviating from it at all. This is not what we're doing here. In this case, you can ask follow-up questions. You can think, some of this is sort of, again, requires you to be a little bit nimble, but you do have the opportunity to like go in there and, ask follow-up questions, usually for clarification, or maybe because what happens is, again, you want your interviewee to answer all your questions, but in another case, they might start to sort of veer away from things a little bit, maybe places that you didn't expect it to go. And sometimes, and a lot of times, that's really cool, because in some ways they're sort of helping you expand your sense of, where your research, what type of information or, that you might have to consider in order to really answer your research question. So sometimes we kind of follow our interviewees to a place that we may not have expected the interview to go. Of course, you want to end up reeling them back into where your questions are, but all that to say is that it requires a level of like nimbleness to sort of have some follow-ups that aren't necessarily like right there written on your piece of paper, but you have the flexibility to do that. Okay. I mean, and if there are things that you don't if there are things that that you're not quite sure about, you might think you understand it, but you're not quite sure. Don't assume, right? Just ask, right? You might even have to say something like, I think I know what you mean by this, but I just want to make sure. So can you please explain, right? And go from there, right? Just because you want to, you don't want to assume, right? That's one of the parts of the rigors of doing this work, is trying not to project, too much of your own. I mean, yes, I was saying before, in some ways we can't remove ourselves from the research because we're part of it. But one of the things we can do in terms of the rigors of it is to really try and give ourselves some methodological tools to like not project our own stuff onto the research. In some ways you can't avoid it, right? Because we're choosing what questions to ask, which theories we're utilizing. But in some ways there's also this sort of danger of like trying to project our own sense of how we would make sense of a specific situation or our own experiences onto our participants, and we want to get them to articulate for as much as we can how they are making sense of it, so that we don't have to make that leap. So we can always say, well, look, it's not just me projecting, like here's the words of them saying it. Okay. Okay. So that's part of what I was saying in this following up continued slide. Don't assume you know the answer. Like, ask genuine questions, right? Avoid leading questions, right? So I know some of you were wondering about like, well, how do I like ask questions in ways that aren't going to like bias, my interviewee? You do that by asking open-ended and non-leading questions, right? So things like, you don't like it here, huh? Like, like that sort of makes it kind of boxes them in, or sort of indicates an answer that you might be looking for. Or, are you sure this is why you decided to become a doctor or a nurse or a teacher? Is it safe to say that you're not satisfied with, where you know, where you work right now? These are all kind of like leading questions, right? You see how it's sort of, especially if you think of the power that you have as an interviewer, like, sometimes when people are doing research and you're doing the interviewing, like they look at you like, wow, you're like this person who like knows something, right? You have a lot of knowledge, little do they know, right? But, um, you have all this knowledge and you're some sort of an expert, right? And so when when that expert's asking you questions, you kind of don't want to seem like an idiot to them. And so, you know what I mean? And maybe like you're thinking that there's like a right or wrong answer, as much as you're telling them there's no right or wrong answer, they're thinking that there is a right or wrong answer. And so if you are like, leading them or doing these, sort of these rhetorical things that say like, oh, I'm assuming you should be dissatisfied right now, or like that really hurts you or something, right? Rather than saying like, well, how did this impact you, right? How did this make you feel? Is more open-ended. Rather than saying this was pretty painful for you, huh? Is then sort of made similar to them, like, oh, this was supposed to be painful for me, because the expert sort of has that assumption embedded in the question, so maybe I should say yes, right? So you want to do open-ended questions that are really, don't assume that you know the answer. That's on the next slide, right? Try and ask questions that don't, presume positivity or negativity. Try and just ask them, how do they feel about this? What did what happened? Uh, how did this make you feel? Tell me about the time when this happened to you, right? And get them talking. I think good interviews have good flows to them. It has a flow where, you ask a question and they're talking a lot, right? Not like question, it's not like back and forth, right? Not like a Kanye West, sway type interview where they're just back. No, it's like you want to ask a question and then they go. Not the Talib, Don Lemon, where they're just good interviews, like you ask a question and they're talking the whole time. That means that you'll just have plenty of text and data to work from. If it's constantly you talking, it's going to be a problem. So that's another good reason in that slide where it talks about not interrupting. You don't want to interrupt your participant for 2 reasons. One, you don't want to break that flow, but also you just don't. Sometimes the reason you might end up interrupting, right, is because sometimes, remember I was saying before, like you might have these clarifying questions, right? And so you might want to be, wait, what do you mean by that? But just let the person talk. Let them, we'll talk about taking notes in a second. Let the person talk. Let them get to the end, and then let them come back to the follow-up question. Okay. Because what you might be missing, if you cut them off, you might have missed some really like golden data, right? They might have said something really interesting or fascinating that you then sort of lost, and maybe they just forget it after that, right? Also, just because you want to like, you want to show them that you're listening, and asking a clarifying question is a way to show them that you're listening, but you want to let them go, let them talk. They're kind of reconstructing something for you, and you want to let them do that, and then come to the follow-up. Okay. It's another way of showing that you're honoring their story, right? I see we have a question from Juliet. Right. A few more effective question starters that are open-ended and non-leading. It's for you guys, a lot of the questions that you guys might be asking might be either about their experiences in school, their experiences in life, racialized type of things, right? And so you might ask them to tell me the first time that you realized that you didn't have privilege because of your race or something like that. And then they might start going off and telling you all these things, right? And all you asked right there was, tell me the first time you realized you didn't have privilege. Now to us, there might be this implicit notion that not having privilege is negative, and there's probably, and for good reason. But they may just have told you the story about that time, right? The time where somebody discriminated against them, used a slur, overheard something, blah, 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 blah. And then this is where usually the leading question comes. It usually comes like, wow, so, that must have been pretty painful, huh? Right? As opposed to, how did that make you feel? So it's really about I'm in a meeting, hon. Sorry about that. So it's how did that, it's really just about trying to open it up for them. So how did that impact you? Tell me about a time when let me just think of a few more off the top of my head. I'm struggling with this right now, but if you want to send me some of your questions, if you want to send me some of your list of questions, I'd be happy to just like take a peek at them real quick to see if I can help you out a little bit, because I'm struggling right now off the top of my head for the open-ended. But it's really about not presuming to know that there's sort of like an answer, not giving either or type answers, obviously. But if you really think you're having problems with your questions, just let me know and I can take a look at it real quick. I hope that was helpful. I think we had another question too from Mila. Oh, good question. How many questions or how much time? I think, this is a good question for Mila. Basically, I think something like half, this is what I'm saying in terms of honoring people, honoring their, their time and their sense that they're sharing something with you. I think, imagine if I was like, I need an hour of your time. I mean, that would be, it's a lot. I think I would go 30 to 45 minutes at the most. I think if you're just asking for somebody's time, I think an hour is fine. If it really takes that long. Oftentimes, if it's a really good interview and or if it's somebody they don't really mind it. But I'm guessing you don't need more than like 30 to 45 minutes worth of interview. In terms of the amount of questions, it depends. There's no magic number to that. I would say like, at least 5 or 6. You might just start off with some big, broad questions, like, you know, like I was saying before, like, tell me the first time you felt, or the first time you experienced whatever, right? And then maybe, in a few questions, kind of slowly drill down to maybe the most, more specific things you're interested in. So I would say something like half an hour to 45 minutes, 5 to 8 questions, is fine. And if it's more, if it's less than, to be honest, if it's less than all that, you could still make it work. For sure. That's what I usually say when I teach, qualitative classes. And I think we had another one from Elena, another question. Let me just, I think I missed one from Elena. Let me see. This was about, I mentioned follow-ups and talked in class about opening the question. Yeah. So this is what I mean. So I think I answered this, Elena. I think I was saying, I think you could have the questions that you have written down that are going to be the guide for like how the interview is going to go. But then as they're answering your questions, that you might have clarifying questions that you can do right then and there, again, without interrupting, but still able to, you can get in there and just right then and there, and then come back to your questions. Usually, you want to think a little bit about the order of questions too, real quick, before I forget about that. Make it so that you're kind of slowly but surely drilling down to the thing you're really interested in. Start off easier stuff, relevant stuff, but easy, big questions, and then more towards what you're really interested in. But yeah, so you want to drill down to your question, the questions that you're asking in your specific order. But as you're going along, you can sort of veer off to get, some clarifying questions, or to get them to say some more about something. So it would be like your big question, follow up. Okay, question 2, fine, you gave me that. Question 3, follow up. Question 4, and like that. That would be the rhythm of it, I guess. Let me see. I missed any other questions for now. I think I'm good on questions. It looks like people are sending questions to me through Gmail more than, I haven't seen any questions on the Hangout page. So if you want to ask any questions, I'm at darrengraves@gmail.com. Let me see what else I have. Say don't interrupt. Tolerate silence. So some of this is like, and this is hard for me because I was sort of socialized in a very Northeast communication style. It's very back and forth. But when you're doing interviews, you should tolerate silence, sort of like the teacher thing where you're, the wait time when you're asked a question. Same sort of principle applies in the interview. You'd be really shocked that if you just wait a little bit without, asking the question, without it being really awkward, that they keep going and they give you some really great information. So sometimes just give people the time to process, just like in class, just like a teacher. You get some interesting information. And then take notes during the interview. So, this is another important piece of information. So even if you're getting it, even if you're audio recording it, I think it makes sense to take notes. One, for if some reason the audio recording gets lost or whatever, or doesn't work or malfunctions, it'll be really weird and contrived in a lot of ways to try and redo the interview. If that happens to you, you can try it and you'll see, but it'll be really contrived. It's almost like reality television where, like, I'm sure, like, something happens and they don't catch it on camera and they're like, do that again, and so that you can get it. It sort of has that feel to it. And so I think you don't, that's why you want to avoid, you want to make sure you have something that works to record it. Sometimes I have a backup. I might use my iPad, like, and my phone or something. But, you want to just take down notes just in case that, just so you have some kind of information you might be able to use. But more importantly, you want to take notes as a way of showing them that you're listening to. It's a good, you don't want to spend your time buried in your notebook or on your computer writing notes the whole time, but it shows them that you're like interested in this stuff. This stuff is of use to you, and it also gives you ways of like making sure that you can like ask follow-up questions, right? So without interrupting them, so you can like write something down and make sure to like you like star it or bold it or something to make that'll help you realize like, okay, I want to make sure to come back to this thing. So take notes too, because it just it's a good backup plan, and also it's just a way of helping you keep track of yourself and what you want to ask them. See, we have a question from Elena. Let me see right here. Oh, thanks. She said I answered it. Good. I don't have much more I was gonna say in terms of my little mini lecture. So I was just gonna like take any more questions if you guys had any. I hope this was somewhat useful. Let me see. Hold on. I'm sort of lost in my computer right now. I don't know where I am. Okay, here we are. I don't know if we have any other questions that are more specific to your specific projects, but I can sit here for a minute, or I was going to be here until 4. Sit here for a few minutes and just see if you guys have any other questions about your projects. You must be getting dizzy right now as I like flip this computer around. I'm trying to get myself comfortable on this couch as I relax. Okay, we got a question. So good. I hope I didn't make you guys too dizzy in the process. Great question. This is about protecting the anonymity of your participants. I think that's usually a way, right, to make sure that people feel comfortable answering these questions, right? And so I think, I think it's pretty fair to say, sometimes people want to be identified, and that's a different story. Maybe usually because they think it's going to be something good said about them. But I think you want to keep people anonymous. So I think there's 2 ways to do that. And you should say, look, to your participant, I'm going to keep you anonymous. And the way you would do that is by doing something like either just saying like going with the generic, like the participant stated, right? I think that's cool, but I'm actually a bigger fan of the pseudonyms, because I feel like it just when you actually read the story, read the research, it sort of rings more true. It sort of just makes more authentic. So I usually use like a pseudonym instead, or you could just say the participant, right? But change the name of the person. But sometimes anonymity is more than just about changing names. Again, in this case, like this research is not going outside anywhere. It's not, so you don't have to worry about things like this. But sometimes you might be doing research in a school, right? And then at the school, only has like 1/3 grade, or only has one, African American teacher, right? That might be a way that someone gets outed a little bit, right? And so it's not, and even if you change the name of the school, but the whole point is if I'm, Harvard professor or Simmons professor Darren Graves goes into, into a school to do this research, and then I walk out of it and change the name of everybody, but then then the research comes out and the people in the school know that it's about their school, because they're going to know that the professor from Simmons wrote this research about and then here's the lone 3rd grade teacher talking badly about the principal or whatever. You didn't really protect that person's anonymity by just changing the name of the school and their name. You might have to do things like changing identifying markers that might identify them in these cases, right? So you might change them from a 3rd grade teacher to an elementary school teacher, right? Like an elementary level teacher, or if it's not too crazy in terms of like being too central in your research, change the gender or the race of the person or whatever, because that's not really the point. It's really about what they're saying, right? So I would go with that level of anonymity. I don't think is you know, something that we're gonna have to worry about in this class, because it's just we're not, our research isn't going out there. But that's another way to think about it. But for the most part, you can just say the participant stated, or you know, change their name, you know, to let us know that it's a pseudonym. Or, you know, maybe the participant doesn't care, you know, at all. Maybe like you're interviewing a family member and that's just known, and like there it is, you know. I don't think you have to, you know, you have to they have to be anonymous, you know, you know, but usually that's, you know, sometimes that's just a way of making people more comfortable. So I think that was it's a good question. I again, I'll just state, I like using the pseudonyms better, only because like when you write it up, it just reads better than like, you know, either like the participant said, or student number 1 or teacher number 5, right, said. It just doesn't, you know, it reads like, it doesn't read like, you know, the power of qualitative research is that sort of narrative richness and quality. And when you have that sort of like third person type kind of like identifier, it kind of loses some of that quality. Hope that answered the question. Okay. Let me see if we have any more questions. Let me see. Let's reload the page. See if any new questions are coming in. I'm gonna wait like 2 more minutes, and if not, I'll probably just end the little Q&A session, and we can all go home. Or let's see. Looks like we're slowing down here. I don't see it. Let me see. Let me just see. Hit the little reload button to make sure I'm not missing anybody's questions here. Again, it's darrengraves@gmail.com, or if you want to go on my, you can use D Graves, the one that's on the syllabus. You can also use that. Gets there. Just I think it gets there a little slower, but doesn't seem like we have any more questions. If you do come up with a new question, you can just shoot me an email, or talk to me in class or whatever. But yeah, definitely shoot me an email if you have more questions. I hope this was useful. I kind of threw this together at the last minute, so I apologize for that. Maybe we should, I think we should figure out a way to integrate this into the class, probably into our methodology class in the future. But appreciate that, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday. All right. Okay. Bye-bye.